Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second Linkurious Enterprise product deep dive. We are focusing today on Linkurious Enterprise query templates. My name is Marilyn. I'm head of customer success at Linkurious. And today I'm with Andrea, our solution engineer.
Hello to everyone and welcome.
So the purpose of this presentation is to give you an overview and an understanding of how you can leverage Linkurious Enterprise query templates with your use case. So here is the agenda. First, we are going to talk about use cases. Then we are going to explain what a query template is. We are going to switch to demo. Andrea is going to show you how it looks like for real. Then we'll talk about best practices. We are going to spend the next 50 minutes or so together. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And you can see in your webinar interface that there's a Q&A section available. You can send there your question anytime, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. For those who joined while we were starting the presentation, there's a quick poll available for you. We'd like to better understand how familiar you are with query templates. Please answer this quick question. Okay, let's start with use cases. So, a bit of context. Let's share a bit of history on why we decided to create query templates. Our customers are companies having different use cases. The users are investigators, auditors, or analysts, and they leverage the power of the graph and discover connections in their data thanks to Linkurious Enterprise. But we often have questions on how to go further with Linkurious Enterprise, how to address specific situations the users are facing. And that's where query templates come in handy. And let me give you a few examples. So to start with, we are going to see how we can automate repetitive investigation steps. Let's say we are analysts working in the social benefit service of a country. We know that we are fighting rings of fraudsters, and we know the kind of relationships we are looking for, typical of these rings of fraudsters. To find this, we always start from the same type of data, and we always follow the same investigation steps. So the question is, how can we automate these repetitive investigation steps and get results faster? That's the first example of what Linkurious Enterprise query templates can help you achieve. Another example is how you can easily query your graph. Let's now pretend we are a data scientist or data engineer working at a bank and supporting the fraud department. As technical expert, we know the query language used by the graph database, and we are able to create queries to help the fraud analysts. Indeed, these fraud analysts do not have the query language skills. But what if we could help them be more autonomous and query the graph on their own? That's another example of what you can achieve with query templates. Last example, how can we control the data input by non-specialists? For this example, let's pretend we are responsible for a team of analysts in a tax office. Your team members have direct access to Linkurious Enterprise to investigate taxpayers, and as they do so, they want to be able to mark the ones they think are suspicious. Ideally, you want them to be able to add a tag on these people and save this information in the graph database so that other analysts can see this tag as they perform their own investigations. The issue is you want the tag to be the same for everybody, and you want the analyst to be limited to this particular modification of the data. Linkurious Enterprise query templates can help you achieve that goal. So, what are query templates? First, query templates allow you to write data from the underlying graph database and define the information you want to display. They can be saved and they can be reused. Secondly, query templates are created by technical profiles, but they are a way to allow people with no query language skills to query the graph on their own, setting the value of the parameters through a simple interface made of forms and buttons. And last point, that query templates can be shared among users. So technical team can create the query templates for the investigators and the analysts. So now it's time to see how we can create these query templates. And Andrea, it's your turn.
Thank you, Marlene, and everyone. Hello to everyone. So let's see together from the system perspective and from the user point of view, what is a query template? So I see in the poll that there are many users already using this feature. So I hope that I will still be able to present something that maybe wasn't known so far. For the other people, let's start from the very beginning. So about a query. Here, I would like to start another poll, maybe just to have an overview about what is the query language that you are aware of. So I can maybe put some more effort on one of the two different languages. So the first one is the Cypher language that is used in Neo4j. The second one is the Gremlin language that is used on Cosmos DB and Janus Graph. In both cases, the query is the same. So the idea is to simply retrieve a node in the database, starting from a specific ID. So you can see the number in both cases is the identifier of the node itself. What would be a template? Well, very simple. The need here is to replace that static value and put what we can call a placeholder or a variable or a parameter. So the idea is that we can reuse this query simply putting a placeholder that could be different every time that we run this query. You can think this like the parameterize the query in the usual database configuration. So very quickly, what is a query template? Is indeed a way to put this placeholder for variables instead of static inputs. Most important thing is that this is a Linkurious Enterprise proprietary syntax. So this means that this is not specific for Gremlin or for Cypher. So you can use exactly the same syntax in both the query languages, and we will see it later. At the end, the query template is also a way actually to help the users in using or in running this query in a more dynamic way, or a dynamic integration with Linkurious Enterprise visualization. We will see during the demo what this dynamical interaction is. Let's start in exploring the syntax. So we said that is a Linkurious Enterprise syntax. So let's see how it is built. The very beginning is just starting writing a template. So we have this syntax where you should put in your query a couple of curly brackets to identify that you are starting writing a variable in your query template. The second element is a mandatory string that actually has two different functions. The first one is to tell what is the label that the user will see during the execution of this query. So actually, when the user will need to fill the different variables, this string will be the label that the user will see in the interface. A second usage is to identify the parameter itself. So actually specifying the same name of this variable in multiple parts of the query, you will be able to reuse the same value. The second part actually is another mandatory variable, and is the variable type. You will need to use the column sign to separate the two entities. We will see very soon all the list of different variable types. In any case, everything is documented in our user documentation under the query template section. The last part is the section for the parameters. This one usually is optional, and we will see how you can use to specify particular behavior of your query template. So let's see what are the possible variable types. So I grouped the different possibilities in 3 different slides. So the first one contains the graph variable. So this is the section that is really making the interaction dynamic with the visualization itself. As you can imagine, there are the first 2 entities that are node and node sets. So this will suggest that you will be able to start this template starting from a node in your visualization. The second one, edge and edge set, is the same, so that the user can start from the edge instead of a node. In all the cases, one possibility for the parameters is that you can add a specific list or just a single one of node category or type edges. This one will allow you to specify in which context the query templates should be available. An important thing is that the last 2, so the edge and edge set, is something that we recently released in our latest beta version. A second group of variables are the non-graph variables. So let's see very quickly all the different options. The first one is the possibility to specify an enumeration of values. So in this case, the parameter is a mandatory list of different values. And using this specific type, the user will get a list of possible values that you defined here in the query template, and will be able to choose one among them, so that you can use the specific value selected by the user in your query. This is usually very useful if you need some kind of value that is consistent, I would say, to work with your query. So let's say you have a list of country in your database, and you want the user to select the correct one that match what is written in your database. So you can define here a list of possible value that will be selected by the user. The second type is a standard Boolean value, so it's just true, false. In this case, you can also select a default value, and this is one of the optional parameters. If you don't select anything, the user will need to select when starting a query. The other 2, date and the time, you can image. Actually, it's used to work with the calendar date and with times. And in this case, there is a mandatory parameter that is the format. So the format in which the input should be translated to be used in your query. We'll see an example of this. There are other optional parameters in this case, for example, to specify the default value or the validity. So a minimum value or a maximum value that the user would be able to select. The other type is number. So simply this is a numeric value, and again you can specify the min, the max, and the default value. Last one is the string. So simple string input, and you can put actually the default value again and a placeholder for the input text. Something that is important to specify is that based on the type that you select, you will correctly get the format in your query. So for example, using a query, you will get, using a string, you will get the value within quotes. In case of number, you will just get the numeric value. The last possibility today, again, is something that we recently shipped in our beta version, is the possibility to get the value from some specific variables from the Linkurious Enterprise environment. Up to today, we only support one variable. So you can imagine that the last parameter in this case is mandatory as well, and is the email. So actually, we can get the email of the user that is connected to Linkurious Enterprise, and we can use this information when performing a query in our database. So I hope that this quick introduction is clear. You have an overview about different possibilities. So let's start with the demo, and let's play, I would say, a bit with our tool. So first of all, I'm going to show how to create and to share a query template. So we'll see what does it mean sharing a query. Then I prepared a few examples that we can see together. So actually how it's used from a user perspective, and what are the query that I actually create for having this environment running. And then we will see how it's possible to configure securities. So let me switch the screen to Linkurious Enterprise. And let's start with the new visualization. So here, I said I'm using the latest version, the beta 1 to 10, so the interface maybe is a bit different from what you were used so far, but all the different concepts still apply. So I'm just opening the query section, and I can go in the query editor. The query editor is the first place that you need to access in order to write a query. I saw in the poll that most of the people are using Cypher, so let me work directly with a Neo4j database and work a bit with Cypher. So let's try to replicate the very basic example. So let's try to retrieve just a node using a placeholder. So retrieve the node where the ID of the node is, and let's try to put the parameter here. You can see that as soon as I put the curly brackets, the system is already recognizing that I'm writing a template. I can have on the right some suggestion and the link to the documentation. So let's put the mandatory parameter that is the identifier of the query. Let's put the column and the type. So let's say the node. And let's also add maybe the optional parameter to select only the person. The end, return n to get the result. You can already see here on the right that indeed I have this ID as a label, and this is just a preview of the different parameters. So here I can start looking for river wisdom, for example. And you can see that since I specify as template the node, here I can start just using the standard feature for Linkurious Enterprise to look for information through simple search bar. So in this case, I can select this input, and I can use this screen to preview the query. So if I just preview, we can see that indeed I'm getting the river wisdom node. I can try to quickly make a change to the template, and here we are still, I would say, in the phase in which we are testing it. So maybe I can switch from the node, and I can just try to have a number. In this case, the input here is expecting a number. You can see that now the form is already asking for a number, so it's doing some kind of validation of the input. I can take again the ID of the node, and if I preview, I will get exactly the same result. So as maybe you have noticed, the way to use the node is indeed to use the result from the node type as the ID of the node. So again, in Cypher, you will get exactly the identifier, and in case of Gremlin, you will get the ID as well as the partition key, so just for efficiency. Once you have the working query, you can save. So let's say I'm creating a demo query. You can share. You can either share the query with all the users, or you can just share it with a group of users, either using the built-in groups or something that I created for this demo. So we can see later the security aspects. So let's say that we are not sharing with everyone. As soon as I save the query, we can retrieve it from one of the previous tabs. So the standard query now is empty because will contain only the queries that doesn't contain any variable defined. So all the other that actually have the scope of this webinar are here in the query template section. And we can see in the demo is the one that we just created. So we can see the details is exactly the one that we did so far. So we saw how it's possible to create a query. So let's try to see some example now. So for running a query, let's start as usual from a bit of context. So you are maybe familiar with our database financial crime, where indeed we are in the context of a bank investigating for suspicious activities of clients. In this specific case, I would like to be in a scenario in which the investigators need to look for fraud on networks. So here, the requirement for the end user is indeed to have, I would say, an easy way to expand some people according to some criteria that is already identified. So the user is expecting to do the same activity multiple times. And for this case, the query that I prepared is a query that will expand all the people connected to a specific person that I'm investigating so far. So let's go back to the screen. Let's start from a person, so River Wisdom. And here we are. So the easiest way to use a query template is indeed to have a graph variable. And in this case, I use the node. So if I just right-click on River Wisdom, I can go on the query section and I can see a list of different queries that I already prepared. So the first one is n level of contacts. So as said here, the expectation is that I will just get all the people that are connected to this person. If I just click, this is what the user will see. Since I put a specific parameter for selecting the number of hops, so the number of steps in the expansion, the user will need to fill this value. As part of the different parameters, I already selected a default value for 3. I also put some constraint in terms of minimum and maximum value. So it doesn't make sense to have 0 or less steps in the expansion. And I would say for performance reason on the database, I would avoid people to expand too many levels. So I put a maximum of 5. Let's start. Let's go back to the default value and let's run the query. In this case, you can see how with a simple click on River Wisdom and just selecting the correct query, the user can already see a part of the network that is expanded. So I said the idea was to find the connected people, and here we have a Gardeniaretto. And if I just try to expand River Wisdom, we see that we have other paths that don't bring to any connected person. So let's undo. From here, clearly it's possible to continue the investigation. So I can either move to the next person query, and I can again run the same query or maybe a different one. So I can automatize the investigation process for the analyst so that with few simple clicks, they will be able to expand everything. So let's go back. Let's try a different query. Or maybe before seeing the next example, let's just see the query itself. So for the Cypher query and Gremlin query, I'm not going too much in the detail of the syntax itself. I just highlighted in bold actually the Linkurious syntax for the parameter. So you can see that in both cases is exactly the same. And the first one is the parameter for the node, and I'm using it as an ID. The second one is the number of specific expand to do. You can see from here, it's, I would say, more clear on the Cypher syntax how I'm using the template really to inject a value in the query itself. So the maximum number of steps is indeed in the expand part. So I'm not using it as a parameter on a value. Let's move to the second example. So we want to have a custom expand. So similar scenario. In this case, we saw that we have some transaction, and we want to easily expand those transactions based on some specific criteria. Let's move back to the screen and let's see what will happen. Here we have our bank account. I can try to expand. In this case, I would say I have just few edges. So I have a total of 4 edges in my visualization, but in the usual case, it could be much more. If we see, we have some information about the amount and the data of the transaction itself. So something is on 2018, something is in 2019. So one query template could be to simulate, I would say, custom behavior in expanding information. So something that could be useful for the transaction could be this custom expand. You can see here that most of the query are not available on this node. So mainly everything is grayed out. This is thanks to the last parameter of the node. So I specifically put where the query should be applicable, and you can see how easy it is for the end user actually to don't make any mistake. So for example, I cannot run on the end level of contacts since it doesn't make sense on the bank account because the query will just look for the people. So specifying the filters will be super helpful for the users actually to avoid to run query where it's not applicable. The risk in that case will be just that they will try to run the query, maybe put different parameters, but they will never get any result. So let's see the custom expand. And again, here I have a few parameters to fill. The first one is the starting date for the transaction. Since I'm using the data, you can see that Linkurious is already helping the user with a calendar. I can quickly select all the transactions starting from beginning of 2019. I can just put a minimum amount of 2000 for my transaction. And if I run the query, I will indeed get only one specific connection among the one that I had before. So I can really create, I would say, a template so that the user can expand the information in the way that they need. Let's see very quickly what is the query behind. And again, let's see the two different queries, both for Cypher and Gremlin. Again, the first parameter is just to get the node. So let's focus on the other two. The second parameter is the date. And for my example, I used the native format of Neo4j. While for Gremlin, actually I used just the string representation of the data, since the native format is something really specific for Neo4j and not for the other databases. And the last parameter is a number, and I just put a minimum value, so to avoid to have actually negative amount that in our demo doesn't make sense. Let's see another example on how it's possible actually to automatize a way to change the information and to actually write something consistent in the database. So I created a query to mark a user or a customer as suspicious. And the idea is indeed that we would like to mark this information and it should be consistent. So we would minimize the risk of errors in having different people trying to write the information in the database. So in this case, let's take again River Wisdom. One possibility would be to edit the node, and the user should actually manually add the property, the value, and maybe you will need to do it, I would say, for different properties. So something that will be useful will be flag, just to say whether this user is suspicious or not. And maybe we want to add a few more information. So about what was the user who marked this information suspicious, when this activity was done, and maybe just put a note. So we would really avoid to have the users manually changing all those data. So with the query template, we can automatize with a simple form. So right-click on the user, tag suspicious. Here, again, River Wisdom is already selected as first parameter. I can just put here comment, so demo, and I can run. Now you can already see a few behavior. So the first one is that the node just changed color. So actually this is just in combination with other feature of our product regarding the default styles. What really the query did is actually adding few information. So the suspicious property wasn't existing before, and the query automatically put the true here. So it was something I would say completely transparent for the end user. Other few information was about the note. So the only parameter that the user put in the form was the demo, so a comment for this note. And the system automatically added a few other information. So the first one, the email of the user who actually did this change, and the time in which this activity was done. So actually a few seconds ago. Let's go back to the slide and let's see the code behind. So here, as usual, the first parameter is the node. Then we just have a parameter that is a string. In this case, I use the placeholder actually just to have the little text within the box actually suggesting to the user what to type in. Then I used the environmental variable to get the email of the user. And at the end, I just used the function from the database actually to get the current time. So with the query template, actually, we can get some information from the interface, so from the user, but we can still continue using the standard option for the query and maybe just use some internal function. On the Cypher query, again, is very similar. I just put the last line in italic because this is something that is working as a Gremlin syntax on John's Graph, for example. Let's have a few comments on the write queries. So maybe it could be obvious for people that are actually managing the system, but maybe not to everyone that will access the feature. So the first one is that the change will affect all the users and existing visualization. So the change will be done directly on the database. So it's not something specific for a single user. So if the same node was already available in a different visualization, when a different user will open that visualization, will see the up-to-date data. The second one, again, could be maybe quite obvious, but is not for everyone. So if you imagine an analyst or someone that is really working on the application side, so starting writing some query to analyze the data, they are not maybe aware about the full project and how all the data are reloaded. So something that you should be sure in your project is that using a query to write data is something that is compatible with your update strategy. Because if you're just reloading your data, so rebuilding a database, the risk is that every change that was done by the user within Linkurious Enterprise actually will be lost after a rebuild of the database, unless you properly get this information and you write back to your original data that are part of the synchronization. The last part is regarding the possibility to run queries. So we'll see very soon how these securities are managed in Linkurious Enterprise. The idea is that every user with the grant for run queries will be able to execute the query. And if this is a write query, actually we are granting the possibility to the user to execute and change the data. So let's see the security configuration. Let's go back to the system. Let's go back, let's save the demo. Access the user and security page. And on the group page, we can create a custom group, for example. And among the different securities, there is the one for the query rights. So no access means that the user won't be able to use the query at all. Can run queries, this means that the user cannot write any query, but he will be able to execute any query that was shared with him. Create read-only queries will allow the user to actually create a query that is only performing read activities on the database. The last one is the most, I would say, higher privilege that will allow the users to write read and write queries. So actually, the system is able to detect whether a query is changing the data, analyzing the syntax and looking for keyword that are indeed the specific syntax to change your database. Again, the people that test this grant will be able to write a query, and this query could change the data. In this case, if the user is going to share with someone else, this new person will be able to execute the query, no matter whether the query will just read data or write as well. So in the scenario of tag suspicious, I would say the example would be an administrator creating the query, sharing with all the users, and even users that doesn't have access to the database for performing changes will be able only to execute the query specifically to perform the actions that are controlled by the system. A very simple scenario of configuration you can see here. So I created a few groups. The first one for someone that doesn't have any query skill. So maybe it could be an analyst or someone else in the company that will only have the read-only access. Something usual is with the junior profile to don't give the privilege actually to change the data. So maybe just assign the grant to create a read-only query. Then the most senior profile could have also the grant actually to perform write queries. Let's move on and let's see some tips and tricks. So I hope here to give some insight to everyone, also the one already using this feature. So something important in this case is to write the query to return the, I would say, correct information based on the expectation. So it's possible to return a full path, and in this case, the expectation is indeed to see the information returned by the query itself. So nothing more compared to what we asked to the query to expand. A second way could be actually to let the system to automatically expand all the connection within the nodes that we are returning. So let's see again on the system a very simple example. So let me go back to our demo. Let me clean up a bit and let's focus only on this specific part where I have River Wisdom, Gardenieret, and I have the address. So one basic feature of Linkurious Enterprise, generally speaking, is that if I just add a node to the visualization, the system will try automatically to get all the connection between the new node and the existing one. So this is very helpful for the analyst actually to see what would be the hidden connection between the new information and something that was already in the visualization to be analyzed. Now, let's say that we want to use a query template to expand the address of River Wisdom. And in particular, we are interested in only having the addresses for which River Wisdom is the owner. So let's remove this node and let's see what we have in the query templates. So I have actually expand properties, and I have two different examples. In the first one, I'm going to return a path. In the second one, I'm only going to return the nodes. Let's see the difference. So in the first one, you can see that I'm just expanding a node that is the street here, and I only get the is-owner connection between River Wisdom and the node. In any case, the system automatically added the as address from Gardenieret to this address as part of the automatic expansion. If I try to run the second query, so I'm just going to return the node. You can see here that I get both the connection between River Wisdom and the street. So namely both the is-owner and the as address. So let's see the query and what is the difference between the two of them. So the change is, I would say, very small. So in the first case, I'm returning the path. So I'm sending a variable p to the full query and returning p. The same for Gremlin, I'm just adding the path. In this case, the system will only return actually all the nodes and edges as part of the query, and is not going to fetch anything else between this information that are returned from the query. So we'll only add the information to the full set of results with the information that they were already in the visualization. In the second case, I'm not returning any edge. So the system will only return a set of nodes that actually was explored in the query. And because of this, the system will try to automatically fetch all the different connections. So I will get actually the two connections from Liver Wisdom and the address. Let's move very quickly to the best practices, or I would say something that we feel we may suggest to our clients. So the first one is let's try to use as much as possible graph context. So you should think of the query templates from the perspective from a user. And you see how simple it is to run the query template just with the right click or a node or an edge. Then using the filter as optional parameter is a good, I would say, best practice to guide a bit the user in selecting the correct query in the current context, so that they would avoid to run some query on different information that wouldn't make sense. Like in our case, the tag is suspicious, or finding the people connected to a specific person, it really does make sense only on a person. That's why it's very useful to put a filter. The second suggestion will be to define patterns in your query as specific as possible. This would be, first of all, helpful for getting the right results and to avoid the noise in the visualization. And second, will help actually to improve the performances of the database. So if you already know the specific path that you're looking for, giving this information to the database usually will help in improving the performances and avoiding to expand in a useless way too many information that you already know that won't bring to any kind of result. Clearly, in some cases, you are really looking for something specific. So either you don't know the direction of the connection between two nodes, or you don't know, or you are really interested in all the different connection type. In that case, of course, you can write the query, I would say, as open as possible. The last one is more about performances and interaction with your database. So clearly, for small databases, maybe you don't see any specific difference with even a query that is written in the wrong way, I would say. But if you start having a very big database, you may feel some performance issues. In this case, of course, the recommendation is to follow the specific database recommendation in terms of configuration of the general configuration itself and the specific one. So usually creating the proper indexes for the properties that are used in the query will help. In my case, when I did the query for the customer expander, I used a specific condition for a range of dates and a range of numbers. So clearly, in a big database, if you don't have the correct indexes, that could have a performance issue. Something specific for Cosmos DB on the other end is the configuration of the partitions and the partition key. So there are a good recommendation from Microsoft actually to split the data in the correct way, for both optimizing the performances of the query and in turn reduce the cost, since this is a database as a service. So I would say we are close to the end of our webinar. So I would like to quickly wrap up what we saw so far. So how to use the query template. We saw how we can replace some static input with some placeholder for the variables. We saw the double quotes. We saw how it's possible to put the different values. We see the importance of choosing the correct variable and the correct parameters for having the best user experience. And we also see how it's possible to share a query. So how we can share a specific query that we wrote with our colleagues, or how we can avoid to share this. In that case, will be only a query for a personal usage. I will switch again to Marilyn. Maybe we can see from a more business perspective why we should use the query template.
Absolutely. We are reaching the end of this presentation, and as a wrap-up, I wanted to highlight the business value. So why would you choose to use Linkurious Enterprise query templates? Well, first, because it's going to help you streamline your investigations. By turning repetitive steps into reusable actions, query templates help your analysts and your investigators save time. They can take more informed decisions faster. Second reason is that with query templates, you're able to create more value for your analysts. Query templates allow you to customize your experience of Linkurious Enterprise, and you can do so leveraging the skills and the expertise of your analysts to define exactly what makes sense for your use case. And last point, it's more a business value. It helps you get the most of your initial investment. You have purchased Linkurious Enterprise and your company is already seeing the value the tool brings to your business. By using query templates, you will increase this value. It will help you accelerate the adoption of the tool by your organization and maximize your ROI. So it's now time for Q&A. Please send additional question in the Q&A section. We'll be happy to answer those. And we are going to get started with the first question, which is, are there query templates example? So if you don't mind, Andrea, I'm going to take this one.
Okay.
So we do have examples available on a blog post. And actually, if you go to the handouts section of this webinar, you should be able to see the link to these top 10 query templates to accelerate your investigations. So it should help you have ideas. Okay, next question. More technical questions. Andrea, can you confirm that we can select several nodes and edges when using a query template?
Yes, so maybe we can quickly see the system. So let's remove the node and let's try again the example of the expand. So the end level of contacts, I can run from a single node, but I can also select two of them. In that case, if I go on the query template, I will be able again to run the specific one, and both the inputs will be here. In this specific context, I'm just actually running the same query multiple times for the same for the different inputs, but we can also use the node set. In that case, the node set will be more useful if you need in the same query a set of results or a set of nodes. In that case, you will get, I would say, an array of different values, and you can just use in your query this array. You may have been noticed that if I just select only two nodes in the query section, I also have a specific part on the bottom that are the kind of query templates that only get two different nodes. So following the order of the selection, I will be able to have a query to get the two specific nodes, like the default one for the shortest path.
Okay, next question, Andrea. How can I point to a property of an edge instead of a property of a node?
So in that case, when you are building your query template, you are not really pointing to a property, you are pointing to a specific item. So let's say a very quick example for the edge. So let me expand, let's try to write a query. A query would look like, again, let's do it in Cypher. I just have my simple query. I have a specific edge. I can do whatever I need, and I can get the ID of an edge. In this case, edge. And I can use the edge type. In this part of the query, this template is actually giving me the ID of the edge, and something else that I can do now, since I have my variable, I can do, I don't know, for example, my variable, and you can do what you need with your variable here. So you cannot get the value directly from the query template, but you can just use in the query as soon as you did your query. So yeah, here could be actually the example I did before with some variable.
Okay. Next question. Is it possible to set a non-mandatory parameter? Comment of the person asking the question. Of course, I can use the default value.
So
do you get the question, Andrea?
Yeah, maybe if it's possible to specify a bit what do we mean with not mandatory parameters, or we can come back later.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll take note of that question and we'll come back to you directly.
So maybe just trying to guess or at least to be a bit more specific on the system itself, when we try to run a specific query from here, let's do again the end level of contacts. All the list of parameters here, everything is mandatory in the query. So since you are actually writing the query and the user will need to input, all the different parameters. To make something optional, actually it's not just a matter of the interface, but will be a matter of structuring the query in the correct way so that you can somehow having a logic to skip some specific values.
Okay.
I hope it answered the question, or in any case would be an extra information for the audience.
Last question, I would say would be how many variables can we combine in a query template?
So the number of queries, I would say, is there is not a specific limit of the number of queries that can be used. So let's go back again in the screen and let's get a specific one. Tag suspicious. So here we use the 3 different templates, 3 different variables. I can continue adding here as many variables as I need. And the main constraint is only of something that is incompatible in the system. So clearly, if I'm starting using a query for working with a node, I cannot also select a different parameter for working with edges or with the node set or edge set, because from a user perspective, actually would be impossible to select the current context based on this query. So I would say you can have one specific graph parameter. You can, in any case, copy-paste multiple times, and you can reuse the same value in different part of your query, whether this makes sense or not. And regarding the other standard parameters, you can do and add as much as you can.
Okay, so actually, Andrea, we do have another question, which is it possible to call a query template, including parameters, from a third-party application? So I guess we want to talk about API quickly here.
Yeah, so in that case, yeah, the fastest way is not, or I would say is not through the query template, but since you're talking about integration with an external application, maybe something that would be useful in this case is the custom action. So the custom action is the different feature, and you can explore more in our documentation or on our webinar of the new feature released in 2.9. And you will see some example there of how it's possible to get the values from a specific property and how you can use to integrate your external application.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, we are going to ask you to rate this webinar. For those who ask questions we haven't covered, we are going to get back to you directly with specific answers. Thank you very much for all the questions you asked. We have reached the end of this presentation, and we really hope you now have a better understanding of how query templates can help you increase the value of Linkurious Enterprise for your business. If you have specific topics you would like to discuss with us related to your own usage of query templates, please get in touch with us through our support at the email address support@Linkurious. The webinar has been recorded, and for those who wondered, the video will be shared with you in the coming days. If you have not answered the poll right now, there will be a survey sent to you along with the video recording. Please answer those questions, because it really helps us improve the content we create for you. Again, thank you very much for joining, and see you next time.
Thank you to everyone. See you next time.